Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time Confederate General James Longstreet arrived on the battlefield and drove back Hancock's Second Corps. Now, Longstreet continues his assault. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Winfield Scott Hancock's attack in the early morning of May 6th met with initial success, but when Longstreet arrived, many of his brigades were thrown back. Some of the units were badly bloodied and needed to be replaced. One of Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps divisions arrived to give Hancock support, that under Brigadier General Thomas Stevenson. Hancock now became worried about his own left flank because more of Longstreet's brigades were arriving as time ticked away. Hancock began assembling a defensive line on the Brock Road to defend his position when Longstreet continued to press his front. To stabilize his front line, Hancock sent the brigade of Sumner Caruth of Stevenson's division to the front. Hearing gunfire to his south, he feared that Longstreet may be moving further south and attempting to turn his flank, so he dispatched Daniel Leisure's brigade down the Brock Road to Todd Tavern. What he actually heard was an engagement between Confederate Cavalry Commander Jeb Stuart and Union Cavalry Commander Philip Sheridan. Colonel Paul Frank's New York Brigade was also sent to the front, to the south of the Orange Plank Road. Frank and Robert McAllister didn't care for one another, and when Frank informed McAllister that he was going to move through his men to attack the Confederates in their front, McAllister refused to allow them through. When Frank attempted to go around McAllister, he ran into the brigade of Goodbrine and his Georgians. The New Yorkers, alone on the front lines, quickly retreated before the gray-clad enemy. Longstreet was gaining reinforcements all morning. Behind Charles Field and Joseph Kershaw's divisions was the 3rd and final division of A.P. Hill's Corps, that under Richard Anderson. General Robert E. Lee's chief engineer, Martin L. Smith, reconnoitered the Federal left flank to see if any advantage could be found. He came back with word that an unfinished railroad cut belonging to the Fredericksburg and Gordonsville Railroad would give Longstreet's troops a perfect avenue along which he could move his men and strike the Federal flank. Longstreet chose his Chief of Staff Moxley Sorrell to lead the attack. Sorrell would command George Anderson's brigade of Field's division, William Wofford's brigade of Kershaw's division, and William Mahone's brigade of Anderson's division in this endeavor. Sorrell remembered that Longstreet said to him, "Colonel, there's a fine chance of a great attack by our right. If you will quickly get into those woods, some brigades will be found much scattered from the fight. Collect them and take charge, form a good line, and then move. Your right push forward and turn it as much as possible to the left. Hit hard when you start, and don't start until you have everything ready. I shall be waiting for your gunfire, and be on hand with fresh troops for further advance." Sorrell rode away from the meeting, feeling that no greater opportunity could be given to an aspiring young staff officer, and I was quickly at work. The brigades of Anderson, Mahone, and Wofford were lined up in fair order and in touch with each other. It was difficult to assemble them in that horrid wilderness, but in an hour we were ready. The brigades filed off into the railroad cut, poised to hit the flank of the Union brigades forming Hancock's front line. Sorrell got in front of the 12th Virginia, took off his hat, and waved it above his head, saying, "Follow me, Virginians. Let me lead you." A member of the 12th Virginia remembered, "The gallantry of this officer on that occasion is as vivid to me now as if it had been but yesterday. I do not remember to have seen during the whole period of the war a finer exhibition of prowess than I witnessed that day in Colonel Sorrell in the Battle of the Wilderness." Sorrell's men let out the rebel yell and slammed into the flank of Hancock's front line. McAllister had spotted the Confederates but couldn't get word fast enough to all the Union units before the attack came. At the same time, the rest of the brigades of Kershaw and Field were pushing forward. Some brigades attempted to turn and thwart the attack, but the bullets hit in their flank from all different angles. It was hard to keep the men's spirits high and keep a cohesive battle line. One soldier remembered that he and his comrades were obliged to run to the right of the line as the rebels came in on our left flank. The ground was covered with the dead and wounded in indescribable confusion. Another soldier wrote, "My leg saved me. We had to leave our dead and wounded, retreat out of that place, leaving all that we had gained in the hands of the enemy." North of the road, Wadsworth and Getty attempted to hold off the Confederates advancing in their front. The 20th Massachusetts was sent forward to hopefully blunt the rebel attack, but the concealed Confederates let loose an unsuspecting volley, which drove the Bay Staters back. Sorrell's attack force was pushing toward the Plank Road, which put the Union brigades on the north side of the road in a dilemma. Being hit from two sides, they decided to fall back to regroup on the Brock Road. The 12th Virginia of Mahone's brigade crossed the Plank Road and realized they were now separated from their brigade. It turned back toward the road, marching toward their fellow regiments. The dense forest obscured who they were to the rest of Mahone's regiments. Unsure of who was approaching them, the rebels south of the road began to fire on their comrades, at the same time that General Longstreet and his staff were riding down the road. It wounded and killed many in the party, including Longstreet, lifting him off the saddle and bringing him down hard. He was taken to the rear with a worried Robert E. Lee looking on. One Union soldier recalled the scene when Longstreet's troops slammed into them. My regiment was caught up as by a whirlwind and broken to fragments, and the terrible tempest of disaster swept on down the Union line, beating back brigade after brigade, and tearing to pieces regiment after regiment, until upwards of 20,000 veterans were fleeing, every man for himself, through the disorganizing and already blood-stained woods, toward the Union rear. Hancock would comment to Longstreet after the war, "You rolled me up like a wet blanket." Lee was now on the field to assess the situation. The rebel brigades were disorganized and needed to reform, so he called off going on the offensive at the moment, but did move his men forward to be ready to strike Hancock's line. Some of the last to leave the Winnowtap field were the brigades of Abner Perrin, William Perry, and Edward Perry. As they moved through the wilderness, they began to encounter Union troops on their left. Not expecting this, confusion went through the ranks, particularly William Perry's brigade. He sent the 48th and 15th Alabama regiments to investigate. The troops in that sector were two brigades from Burnside's corps, Potter's division. Ulysses S. Grant had been pressuring Burnside all morning to assist Hancock, and now, at a little after 1 o'clock, Burnside's troops were now hitting the flank of Longstreet's line. William Perry soon realized that there were more Federals than could be dealt with by his two regiments, and fronted the entire brigade northward. The Alabamians threw up breastworks the best they could. A Pennsylvanian wrote, "The movement was made through a dense wood, almost impenetrable owing to the entangled underbrush. The attack was made where it was utterly impossible to see anything from the thickness of the woods. The enemy was posted on the opposite side of a swampy ravine, behind entrenchments." One of his comrades recalled that those entrenchments or breastworks were made up of felled trees and the bodies of their dead. Edward Perry's Floridians faced north as well to confront the Yankees. The Florida Brigade numbered roughly 500 men, and when Zanus Bliss's brigade struck their line, it caved in. At about the same time, the 15th and 44th Alabama attempted to counterattack Bliss's right flank, but the tired Southerners couldn't budge the blue troops. William Perry's Alabamians held up against the fresh troops, but some Union soldiers were making their way into the Confederate breastworks. Reinforcements needed to come quickly. Burnside observed the engagement and ordered Griffin's brigade in, as well as Hartranft. Griffin's men joined Bliss's troops, with some of the more disheartened of Bliss's soldiers falling back. The rebel brigades of Dudley DuBose, John Stone, and Nathaniel Harris were also coming to reinforce their comrades. A Union soldier remembered, "Sharp firing at very close range ensued, followed by a savage charge which brought the boys into the enemy's rifle pits in some places. Being unable to maintain the advantage gained, the troops fell back. Twice the charge was renewed, considerable ground was gained, but the enemy retained possession of their lines. When Perry's brigade couldn't stand any more, their comrades reinforced their line as they pulled back. The two sides battled over the breastworks thrown up by the Alabamians. A member of the 36th Massachusetts remembered, "The regiment was loath to give up the great advantage it had gained, and the fighting was hand-to-hand, terrible and bloody. The men fought gallantly, but the force upon our left was too strong, and our line was compelled to retire, falling back slowly, with their faces toward the enemy. Finally, Burnside was able to stabilize his line, but with both sides exhausted and running low on ammunition, the battle drifted into a lull on Burnside's front. To the west, Longstreet's troops would soon attack Hancock's men assembled on the Brock Road. The appearance of Longstreet at the Winnowtap Field had saved Lee's Army of Northern Virginia that day and pushed Hancock's troops back to their stepping-off point on the Brock Road. Lee's strategy of keeping Grant and Meade in the wilderness to nullify their superiority in numbers had worked incredibly well so far by limiting the movements of Union forces and concealing his own movements.